Good afternoon and welcome to this webinar brought to you by the St. John Paul II National Shrine. My name is Dr. Daniel Miola and I work in the Mission and Ministry Office at the Shrine. I'll be serving as your host and moderator for today's webinar. Thank you for joining us. Before I introduce our speaker, I'd like to just say a few words about Evangelium Vitae, the Gospel of Life. In the Gospel of Life, Pope John Paul II exhorts us to recover and build a culture of life by lovingly accompanying others with a contemplative outlook upon life. He goes on to say that, quote, "It is this deep love for every man and woman which has given rise down the centuries to an outstanding history of charity. Every Christian community with a renewed sense of responsibility must continue to write this history. To this end, appropriate and effective programs of support for new life must be implemented, with special closeness to mothers, who, even without the help of the father, are not afraid to bring their child into the world and raise it. Today," end quote. Today, we'll be featuring Stephen Wallace, who continues this amazing Christian history of charity through directing the Gabriel Network in Maryland. The Gabriel Network is precisely one of those new charities of support for new life with special closeness to mothers that Pope John Paul II called for in the Gospel of Life. Stephen Wallace joined Gabriel Network in September of 2014 after an active legal practice with Drinker, Biddle, and Reith in Washington, D.C. He is a proud alumnus of Notre Dame Law School and Franciscan University of Steubenville. Stephen joined the National Maternity Housing Coalition Leadership Council in 2017, and then was elected president of the council in 2018. Stephen lives with his wife, Meta, and their 4 children in Laurel, Maryland, and are members of St. Mary of the Mills Parish. Stephen will be speaking on the Gospel of Life in accompanying women in crisis pregnancies. We will have a question and answer period at the end of this webinar. So please be sure to type your questions in the Q&A box below. We will do our best to get through as many of them as possible. So let's get started. Just a second. Welcome, Stephen.
Hi, Dan. Good to be here with you.
Thank you for joining us. So I'd like to start this webinar with just a question in general about the Gabriel Network. Can you please tell our audience a little bit about the work that you do and the special connection with the women in crisis pregnancies?
Absolutely. So Gabriel Network actually shares a birthday. We're in our 25th anniversary this year, just like Evangelium Vitae. And during that time, Gabriel Network came to be following the work of people in Texas who had looked at the issue of how to support women facing a crisis pregnancy better from their parish. And they said, you know what, we're just going to put up a sign outside of our church and we're going to say that whoever comes to our church to help, looking for help in this situation, we're going to help them. And inspired by that success, that parish helped, and then more parishes helped. Many Gabriel projects have started around the country. We are one of those that grew up as a grassroots church and parish-based effort. So here in Maryland, it was an ecumenical group of many different Christian denominations with a lot of Catholic leadership who took on the challenge of trying to serve women and children out of a parish-based response. And so Gabriel Network's vision is to empower women to choose life, to embrace them in Christ's love and the care of his people. And that emphasis on it being the response of the church has always been core to who we are. As we grew and grew, we changed our name to Gabriel Network to kind of embody this larger sense of churches working together. And then about 20 years ago, due to the need for housing that so many of our churches were experiencing as they helped different families, we added a maternity housing program that we run organizationally. And so we have 2 maternity homes, one in the Bowie area and one in the Ellicott City area. And we're opening a 3rd. We're really excited about that. We just hit our fundraising goal for our 3rd home, and that will be in Gaithersburg. And God willing, that will open this summer. So we're excited about that opportunity to provide supported, loving, safe housing for homeless women who are going through this period of change.
That's excellent. Just to touch base a little bit about the challenges facing these women that come to see you in the homes or get counseling and resources and support. Can you tell our audience a little bit about the challenges, both pre-COVID and post-COVID, that these women are facing?
Sure. Yeah, it does feel like we should have a new calendar system or something for pre-COVID and post-COVID. Been so many changes. The major changes, and I think St. John Paul II lays these out so well. In rereading Evangelium Vitae for our conversation, Dan, it was amazing how it seemed like it could have just been written yesterday. He talks about the depression, the loneliness, the isolation that comes from increasing activity in the culture of death. He talks about people being left alone with their problems. And that really spoke to what we see on a regular basis, right? There's a quiet desperation in the calls that we receive from grandmothers, from the mothers themselves, from friends, from third-party social worker folks or people in the health system who know that abortion is wrong, who know that it's not the right choice, but feel desperate to try to avoid something else that's wrong, right? And the loneliness and the isolation are, they were there so strongly 25 years ago, and they're still there now, right? I think many of us are experiencing maybe a glimpse of what that's like through our own experience of the coronavirus. Lockdowns, depending on where you are and what your family situation is. This could be a glimpse for us, a way for us to accompany them in the isolation that these mothers experience on a regular basis. So many of the challenges remain the same. Many of the mothers who come to us are coming from an experience of trauma or an experience of generational poverty. Many haven't seen, things that we would think of as a supportive family. Many of their relationships are transactional in terms of people expect something from them. They're not interested in the relationship just for the woman's sake, and that's so much of what our angel friends, those are the volunteers at our churches who work directly with the mothers, so much of what they offer is that connection, the relationship, accompaniment, and it moves from a material to an emotional to a spiritual support. So that's where the work of an accompany that we do complements that of the wonderful work of pregnancy centers, pro-life doctors, and including in the maternity homes. All of these services are needed, work together.
Yeah, that's a really great point. I really like how you put the accompaniment of moving from the material to the spiritual, because I think that's so important for us to realize the unique gifts that we have as a Christian community to offer these women, especially alleviating that loneliness. I mean, loneliness is not just a material problem, and you're in a unique position for helping them with those homes. So could you talk a little bit more about that process of going from material help to spiritual help? What are some of the things that you sort of try to focus on with the women in accompaniment?
Sure. We have the idea in our Christian tradition on grace building on nature, right? Where we have natural gifts and God's spiritual gifts build on that. The same kind of process we see happen over and over again in our relationship with the women who are coming to us for help, where they're in a survival mentality. They're really focused on their physical needs right now, and we're, through the eyes of faith and not being in a survival situation ourselves, we can see the broader spiritual picture that's also in play, but that's not something that they're ready to engage with yet. So we can give them the space by supporting them in their material needs to rest, to recover, to feel supported and safe enough to be able to engage the deeper spiritual realities. So I'm kind of an abstract person. I'll give you maybe an example that's a better story. There's a resident in one of our maternity homes who was there last year, and she came in and she was remarkable in how laser focused she was on finishing her school, improving her education, getting a job, fixing her finances. Right, she had a number of loans that were really tough. She had no family support. She'd been particularly abortion vulnerable when she came in because of her finances. She couldn't afford anywhere to live. So when she came in, she was real abrasive on anything that wasn't related to stuff for her baby, and things that were going to improve her finances. Right. So we kept offering, okay, we're going to have Bible study. She would talk with her angel friends about all kinds of things, but they would try to bring up, her relationship with the Lord periodically, just to see if that's something she was open to, and she would just shut it down. So they respected that. But after, I'd say, about 3 months of being in the home, you could see her kind of unclench, right? She'd been holding everything so tightly to try to survive, and she was starting to trust that now she could be safe. She could think about other things. She could not be so just focused on what today and tomorrow's needs were. And for the next 6 months that she was with us, her conversation started to change, right? And the patience of the staff at the home and the angel friends to wait, to not rush her, to allow her to trust the material support, right? That trust gave her the ability to listen and be open to the spiritual, which ultimately is more important, right? As we know. But grace builds on nature. There's real wisdom in that.
Yeah, thank you. That's an excellent example. And just to tease this out a little bit more for our listeners about the spiritual needs of women, and thank you for reminding us about the need for gradualness. That's a lesson we all need to recognize when we're trying to evangelize and help others. In the Gospel of Life, Pope John Paul II emphasizes how, quote, the life of every individual from its very beginning is part of God's plan, end quote. Therefore, properly speaking, there's no unwanted children, no unwanted mothers, no unwanted women in God's providence. So how does this fundamental Christian truth inform your work and outlook accompanying women like you just talked about? And specifically maybe getting at the question of like their dignity. How does that inform your work?
Yeah. It was refreshing. I've been doing this for for 5 years now, and we always need to be refreshed, reminded of the why we specifically are in a specific ministry. And I felt some of that from reading St. John Paul II's words about dignity, right? He writes so beautifully and passionately about the dignity of every human person. And he writes this to all people of goodwill, right? He talks about reason, he talks about natural law, but this dignity is the foundation of our whole civilization, of how we relate to each other. And this right to life is foundational to all our other rights. And then, right, as writing to Christians and Catholics, he can go even further to talk about the beauty of God's plan for each person. And this is something that we, to our angel friends and to our staff, we can forget sometimes in the day-to-day, right? There were a lot of days in those 3 months before that resident I was telling you about opened up, where that abrasiveness was tough, right? That abrasiveness was difficult to deal with, and we have to remember, the weight of glory that this person brings in into every moment of her life, whether she's living up to it at the moment or not. I mean, same for all of us. Underlying all of that, this is part of the horror of abortion, is that the dignity that we all share, how much more clear that is for a child who is so perfectly innocent. That child has had no opportunity to do anything wrong in any way. And this is, the person who's victimized the most in the situation. And that reality, confronting that reality again, reminding us of that reality should move in us a desire for justice, a desire to be part of God's plan to bring about healing and restoration. So that's a huge motivation for those who are involved in this work. And it's a beautiful part of this document.
Yeah, my heart just breaks for all the unborn children whose lives are lost, and just really grateful for people like you and others laboring for them, and also for the women who maybe they don't realize it now, but of course you see it too. They're harmed as well through the abortion procedure as well. And I want to touch on something just to go a little bit more deeper on the women's experience. In the Gospel of Life, John Paul II says it's key for us when we're accompanying women or vulnerable or the suffering, again, to have a contemplative outlook. And part of this contemplative outlook we've already discussed about the spiritual needs, their dignity, but the other side of it too is to see everything in life as a gift. And women in crisis pregnancies, sometimes I hear, okay, they recognize the dignity and personhood of the child, but their suffering is so great that it supersedes their decision-making for the personhood of the child. So how can we help women understand their suffering, as difficult it is, and they're in some horrendous situations, homeless, lack of family support, lack of security in all sorts of ways. It's a really tremendous suffering. How can we help them see their suffering as part of a gift?
Yeah, it's a great question, Dan. I think a couple of ways to go about answering it is we can take some cues from how John Paul II addresses those who have had abortions, who have procured abortion, near the end of this document. And he writes both with clarity on the objective wrongness of the action. He does not he does not gloss over or refuse to name that it was wrong and that it was gravely evil. But he writes with great understanding of the suffering which both went into the decision and results from it. And I'm glad you brought up the contemplative outlook portion of this. We emphasize to our volunteers and to our staff, right, the importance of prayer when engaging in this work, to pray regularly as part of it, to pray before conversations with mothers, to pray before deciding on a course of action on how to support a specific person. So both of those are great suggestions, and more than suggestions, great words to live by from John Paul II, because they recognize the truth of the situation. The suffering does not change whether the decision was right or wrong. It may change her culpability, but that alleviating that suffering can be a way that we can prevent abortions from happening. That happens on a regular basis here. And we can also learn to understand, right? Psychology has a lot to tell us. I've been learning more about this from my experience in the National Maternity Housing Coalition. There's a lot of study of trauma and its effects on our decision making. There's a lot of learning that psychologists can give us on that process where our rational mind shuts down when we go into survival mode, and we really make decisions based on protecting ourselves and our emotional well-being. And a lot of those effects are biological and psychological. Again, it doesn't change the objective wrongness, but it can help us to respond in a way to allow a person to move out of that state of thinking and make a better decision, right? By giving them security, by giving them space, by helping them to trust others. Relationships are huge in that, right? A more positive part of what you're talking about comes through in the resiliency that we encourage our residents and our those mothers working with Angel Friend teams to start to build in themselves, right? To not to see their suffering as a thing done to them, but as an opportunity to embrace, right? Those who are open to it, to speak of suffering, embracing the suffering of the cross. Every person has suffering in their life. Even the most perfect, even our Lord. So it's not something that any of us should be ultimately surprised by. And those who are resilient are able to move through suffering with a greater sense of gratitude for their blessings, of joy, of offering it up. And those are difficult conversations, but if we want to give those that we're helping, those that we're serving our best, then we have to prepare well to have them, and then be courageous in having them.
Yeah, well said. I would just like to say, on the flip side of this question, I know anytime I do ministry, I often receive more than I give. And so we talked about helping women see their lives as a gift, their suffering even as a gift. But on the flip side, one of the best ways to help them through suffering is to point out how God's already at work in their life already, even if they're not aware of it. So could you speak a little bit about how your work with these mothers teach you about life as a gift?
Yeah, it's hard to pick it's hard to pick just one or two examples of that. Two come to mind. There was a mother that was living, she's living bus to bus in Northwest DC a few years ago when she called us, and she really did not want to go through with the abortion that she had scheduled. But she's living bus to bus. She felt like there was no alternative for her situation. And from as soon as she was offered a better choice, right? As soon as she had got in touch with us and realized that she could come and stay in one of our homes and be supported through that, she then moved through the next 9 to 12 months that she was with us, just from success to success, right? With the support that she received, but so much from her own initiative. She got a good job. She was promoted in it several times, even before she gave birth, which was not that long. It was a job that gave maternity benefits, which really speaks to how well she had done, that she was able to secure that when she was so obviously pregnant. Like, that's not an easy thing to do. And she just continued to move with gratitude and with perseverance. And I would find myself looking at the things that were stopping me from accomplishing various things. And, what are these obstacles? Like, the Wi-Fi is broken, or, things that just seem ridiculous in comparison. We don't have quite enough money in the bank for that program. Fundraising is a struggle, or we wish we had more volunteers, or that sort of thing. I mean, look at what she's overcoming. Just to, and she was so motivated by giving her child a better life. And we hear that over and over and over again, that they want their child to have a good life, a better life than they had. And it's beautiful to see that come out of them. Another one just briefly comes to mind, and she similarly felt like she had no options to get an abortion when she was presented with support from a pregnancy center and ourselves and a local church who all worked closely together to assist her. She really took advantage of the opportunity. She got a job through that church. She and her child were both baptized, which was beautiful. And she ended up getting, the job was so good, she ended up getting her own apartment. And the family that had refused to help her, refused to house her when she was pregnant just months before, she ended up bringing them in to her apartment with her son when they got in housing trouble, right? So not only did she take a bad situation and provide for herself and her son, embrace the support that was offered to her, but she then paid it back to the people who had rejected her, who should have been there for her. And that made me think about some of my own family relationships and relationships with friends where like what excuse do I have for not reconciling, or for not being grateful for the great relationships that I have. So God is good. He helps each of us to help each other in this situation. It is not a one-way street at all.
Yeah, the stories are beautiful, especially the last one about reconciliation to those who didn't support you. I was very moved by that. Also, the first story really struck me, that the importance of just having a home. Just having a home. I mean, that strikes me on a very personal level. I'm an adult child of divorce, so I had my home split. But these people, like you said, are a lot of times homeless. Just having a home And it's so beautiful that you can offer that. Can you just say a little bit more about the importance of offering a home? Because the homes that you offer too, they're not these big group homes. They're real homes, like suburban homes where a few women live in them. But can you speak about the importance of giving a home to these women?
I'd encourage everyone to, when we're done here, to visit our Facebook page and watch our video. It's called Shauna and Kai, which is on our video page there. Rashana was a resident in one of our homes a couple years ago now, and she speaks really beautifully about exactly that. And I can't, I cannot approximate her emotion in genuineness in expressing how important that is. You know, we say words like safety and security and home and a fresh start and a place to belong, right? That belonging that we feel when we're really where we're supposed to be and the people want us to be there and we're growing. And that those words mean things to us, but how much more do they mean when we haven't had them, right? If you've had an experience where those have been rejected, where you've been rejected from them, or it's been taken away from you, or even, you know, through your own actions, you've come to lose them. That is we see that with many of our residents, that a switch will flip where they'll stop being viewing it as a shelter and they'll start viewing it as a home. And Rashana was one that I will always remember for that. She is remarkable in a number of ways, but one of them, she's the only person I know of who has left our home and bought her own home directly after leaving, which, as you can imagine, is quite a feat. So I'm very, very proud of her, and grateful to everybody who's involved in Gabriel Network for giving her the opportunity to have that belonging.
Yeah, I love what you said about helping women move from seeing this as a place of a shelter to a home with a deep sense of belonging. I mean, that's so crucial for Christian accompaniment. And now, please just remind my audience, if you want to ask any questions, we're going to get to the live Q&A, so please put it in the Q&A box. And now I'm going to ask my last question to Stephen. The Gospel of Life speaks about the necessary solidarity between all persons. So how can we better accompany women in crisis pregnancies, even if we're not directly engaged with the work? How can we better accompany?
Thanks, Dan. Love this question. So I've got 2 ways that folks can get involved. Pope John Paul II is really blunt in Evangelium Vitae that this is a work for everyone. Being part of the work of life is for everyone, you know, period. And I'd encourage everyone to examine how you're part of building the culture of life. Is something we can all do. For Gabriel Network specifically, I'd ask you to look at your church, look at your parish. If you have a Gabriel Network team, try to support it. If you don't, why not? Right? This is a work that's needed all across Maryland and DC. If you guys are tuning in from around the country, there may be a Gabriel project near you to start. You could be the one that starts it. Talk to your pastor, contact us. So consider an Angel Friend team. And then I would ask everybody to consider supporting us financially. Homes don't heat themselves. Volunteers don't train themselves. This is a work that needs to be equipped and equipped well. The needs that are that women are facing, that families are facing when they're confronted with abortion, are only growing. The wages of the culture of death have only deepened over the last 25 years. So your support is greatly needed. Us either at gabrielnetwork.org, which is our client-facing site, or at lovegn.org, lovegn.org, and we would be grateful for any support you can offer.
Thank you, Stephen. And yes, dear audience, please do support his good work. Now we're going to turn it over to the live Q&A. So again, please put your questions in the Q&A box down below, and I will try to get to as many of them as possible. The first question is somebody from North Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. So you mentioned Gabriel projects throughout the country. Are there other noted efforts in Canada? How can I find out information about them? I'm a Canadian Knight of Columbus, and I'm always interested to hear about how I can better serve my country and culture through USA perspectives. So how would he find out info about Gabriel projects in general? Or can he start a Gabriel Network with your help if he's a person of means?
Sure. So great question. I didn't know that the shrine reached so far, so that's awesome. We love the Knights of Columbus as well. Great, many supporters from the Knights. I'm a Knight myself. So I don't know about North Vancouver. There's about 17 states that have Gabriel projects, all of which are kind of run independently. Some are run out of dioceses, some are independent nonprofits like mine. If he's thinking about getting started or just wants to learn more, I'd be happy to talk to him about it. If he's interested in the work of maternity housing, or if someone's interested in that specifically, then the National Maternity Housing Coalition that I'm a part of, there's about 120 homes in that coalition around the country. And a big part of what we do is help people start homes. Lots of advice, lots of learning, lots of mistakes to avoid. So if you contact me, I'd be happy to talk to you about that as well.
So what's the best way to contact you again? Can you give your
Sure. I'll give my my email address, which is stephen.wallace at gabrielnetwork.org. That's Stephen with a PH, the way it should be spelled. Or you can find me on our website at lovegn.org.
Okay, great. Now our next question is, there's a lot of people who have had experience with somebody who is thinking about abortion. What advice do you have to give to those lay people who encounter these situations? What are some conversations that we should have and some things that we should avoid?
That's always a great way to think about it, how to avoid the unforced errors. So I have a couple of preparatory notes, and then maybe if you're in the conversation. First of all, I recommend to everybody to take it seriously that working on the culture of life is everyone's duty. Right? There's many aspects in it, and this web series I know is going to hit on quite a few of them, end of life issues and others. But it's very likely that you have or will be in a conversation like this at some point. So take the opportunity to prepare yourself to do that well. You know, you're almost guaranteed to have a local pregnancy center that will do trainings on how to have these conversations, sidewalk counselors for life, 40 days for life. There's many, many excellent trainings available to prepare you to how to do this well, right? You don't have to wait until it's upon you to do that. And, you know, Bishop Barron, who I listen to often, right? He talks about we really have no excuse when we are such a thinking religion, right, for not being prepared on these things. So I challenge you to get yourself ready before you're in the moment. That's not only intellectually, but also spiritually, right? That contemplative outlook is so important here as well. If you're in the moment, right, dealing with your own fear of doing it wrong is huge. Right? Remember that this is a person. It's a person who is scared. It's a person who is trying to solve a problem, whatever she sees as a problem. So when you're talking to somebody who is scared, you have to stay calm. You have to be loving, right? You have to, even simple physical things like keep your distance, keep your hands where she can see them, no sudden movements, that kind of thing. You're calm, you're safe, you're speaking in a measured tone. And what your goal for her is for her to widen her perspective, right? She's totally focused on this narrow problem to solve, and she's laser focused on that, right? Help her through the gifts that God's given you, through the moment that you're in, to widen her perspective and be open to the Holy Spirit on that. So, that whole thing is probably like a 6-week course, which I encourage you to go do. This is a skill that all of us can practice and become excellent in.
And can you just say again where the 6-week course is that you recommend?
My first recommendation would be to go to your local pregnancy center. This is what they have expertise in. My next would be 40 Days for Life, and then Sidewalk Advocates for Life. Those would be my first choices. 6-week course is don't take that literally. Just a shorthand there.
Okay, and just follow up to that question is a lot of people are afraid to engage these types of conversations because they're afraid of saying the wrong thing. And what happens if the woman does choose abortion? I've heard from friends and other people who have tried to intervene with people. There are still sadly cases where they've done practically everything right, or at least nothing wrong, and the woman still chooses abortion. I'm sure you've had some cases like that. How do you deal spiritually with, potential guilt or, those spiritual things that can arise that you can feel like you didn't do enough, etc. Because that's a real roadblock with accompaniment.
Yeah. Well, I think recognizing that it's going to happen. It's going to be really hard right from the outset is good. When I talk with my team here about this, I really emphasize that we are dealing with adults with freedom, right? Adults with agency. We don't control them, and ultimately we can't decide for them. So we're responsible for our preparation and our effort in the moment, our follow-up, all of those things. We're not ultimately responsible for her decision. And we can't judge our effectiveness by whether we convince everyone, because you're never going to convince everyone. The only thing you can be sure is if you don't try, you'll convince no one. Right? And every success you have, right, we talked about the dignity of the human person earlier, not nearly at enough length. Go read Evangelium Vitae. But flip it around. Every success, every person who you help to to choose out of love, right? That is a tremendous success, right? So celebrate those successes. You know, each one of them is, right? What word are we going to use for it? Each one of them is awesome in its real meaning. And then allow yourself, like we just had a similar one of these the other day, and it was real difficult for me. I've been doing this for 5 years. I'm still giving myself some time to get over it. You know, it's one where we don't know what she chose, right? We've offered all the help we could. We know she didn't take us up on it. We don't know the rest of the story. We probably never will. But that doesn't change our responsibility to be there for the next person.
Thank you for your witness, Stephen, and your honesty, and clearly your love. And I can even see some grief on your face thinking of that last situation. I think that's important too, to grieve as well. So thank you for the love that you pour into this work. Is there anything else you would like to add before we conclude this webinar?
I will add just a note of encouragement to everybody. You know, it's certainly my personality. It's the personality of many people in this work to focus on the difficulties and the struggles and, you know, the Planned Parenthood machine that we work against, the culture of death. But, right, read Evangelium Vitae and you'll see that John Paul II is moving from joy, ultimately. Underlying all of it is the joy of the gospel and the culture of life. And that's what that's the victory that we all share in. So, right, confront the difficulties, but don't be overwhelmed by them. And that goes with this and with the coronavirus and everything else that we deal with, right? Ultimately, God wins, and let's make sure we're working with him.
All right. Thank you again, Stephen Wallace of the Gabriel Network, for joining us today. We really appreciate your time. And dear audience, please make sure to support him and the Gabriel Network. And now I'd like to just take a few moments to share with you some of our other things coming up. We hope you've enjoyed this webinar brought to you by the St. John Paul II National Shrine. While the shrine is currently closed because of the coronavirus impact, we're planning several future online events to help bring the shrine to you, as listed on this panel. Also, please note that next week's Gospel of Life webinar will be accompanying disabled persons. But also you can follow us on our website or on social media, including YouTube, and you can learn about upcoming virtual events, upcoming webinars, exclusive digital content like our Art of Prayer series. You can stream Mass online, stream rosaries online during the month of May. So thank you again for joining us, and God bless you. Stay safe and be well.